Welcome back, everyone, to the Jake Broe Show. Joining us again today on the channel is independent journalist Caolan Robertson. Last time he was on the channel was in February, and your social media in that time has kind of exploded. When I was speaking to you, I think this was last December, you were just deciding you were going to go off on your own and try and do the whole work for yourself as opposed to a larger organization. So, Caolan, how have you been, especially in the year 2025? What's this year been like for you?
I've been good. Thanks for having me back. I can't believe it's been nearly a year. I think it was just after I came back from Kursk last time I was on your channel, and this was a huge, a huge sort of media thing. But I've been good. And looking back, I think I made the right decision because we've had a massive scandal break recently. Sasha meets Russia, massive amounts of people who are paid by the Russian state propagandists. So many people are distrusting anyone that really works for any major organization or government now. And I was given, honestly, so many job offers, so much money by different governments and different organizations and news outlets since even our interview, and decided to turn it down just to keep going independent, just to keep telling the truth exactly as I wanted without any editors. And people seem to really like it. And I think people are craving the truth now more than ever. And they're looking for individual people to get that truth from, individual people who experience it from the front line or just their own perspectives. And I'm glad I stuck through it, but it's been a wild ride. I'm pretty I'm pretty exhausted, to be honest. I've covered sort of every area of Ukraine since then and the ups and downs, but it's been kind of unusual but really amazing to be able to do something like this independently. All my friends, when I first moved to Ukraine and first visited this country in 2023, said that it was impossible unless you had mainstream media backing, unless you had major producers or fixers to make these trips happen. But since I started things like Patreon and just YouTube ad revenue and just going solo and just trusting the process, it's basically made it possible to go solo and just show exactly what I'm seeing. And it's been kind of amazing, because it sort of, I stopped believing for a while that people cared about the truth, and I thought that people just wanted to hear what they wanted to believe. And the only time anyone puts money into anything is when it's something dark, right? It's the Tenet media scandal. People don't pay money for good things; they want to pay money for bad things. That's why Russian propaganda is so successful. But seeing so many people genuinely just care about independent reporting has been amazing and restored so much trust in humanity, I think.
So, I actually need your help here. I need you to explain to me what this scandal is. I've been kind of busy the last 7 days. I was traveling a little bit. I don't even know who Sasha Meets Russia is, but now I'm seeing people like talking about this. I don't know. Like, can you explain to me what is this scandal with pro-Russian influencers being paid?
Yeah, so there was a big gala that was done at sort of an opera house in Moscow a couple of weeks ago, and there was an investigation done into it. And there's a sort of big Russian company that everyone there was linked to. Sasha Meets Russia is a Twitter personality. She's a girl that tours Russia independently, just shows the world the nice side of Russia that the mainstream media doesn't want to show you. Everything seems very nice and non-political. And it turns out she was wearing a T-shirt with the branding and the logo of the same company that are paying these influencers up to $2,000 a month to put out this propaganda. Jackson Hinkle was at this gala. Obviously, Scott Ritter was at this gala, the usual names. But Russia's been intensifying their propaganda massively in the last few months, especially on Twitter, because it's not restricted there, right? YouTube shut down 2,000 Russian linked YouTube channels a few months ago. Twitter is not doing that. So they're all on there and they're piling on. And so that was a huge scandal, and people are seeing that. And it makes me glad that I'm not associated with any government in a lot of ways as well, even though if I was associated with the British government or the Ukrainian government or the US government, it would be nowhere as bad as Russia. It's still this distrust, right? If you take money from the state, and she's been exposed for this, and this is just going to continue. It's the same as the Tenet media scandal, but it's quite dramatic to see it all unfold like this.
This is just wild to me because I probably have been the most viewed American pro Ukraine YouTuber for the last 3.5 years. And I keep waiting for someone to contact me to offer me money to keep doing what I'm already doing. When I hear about these scandals of the Russian government paying influencers, I'm like, where's my check? I mean, I keep waiting for somebody to contact me to offer to give me money to do what I already want to do. And I guess I'm just going to have to keep waiting because I don't think it's going to happen under Trump.
I think they choose pretty specifically people that look like they can be bought. I don't think you seem like someone that can be bought. I think you seem like someone who knows exactly what they're talking about, who believes in what they're doing. I think they look for people like Tim Pool. They look for people who are already on the fence, who are already putting out, you know, propaganda in some ways, and they target them. So we'll see so much more of that.
So you went to Kursk, and I think that is what got the Russians' attention. So can you talk about what was the response? Were you like officially sanctioned by Russia, or what did they do?
Yeah, well, I guess our interview was before the official sanctions came into place. I thought there would be something because all the journalists that went there were put on a list of a no-fly zone into Russia. But they set up an entire court case after I went there, and they put me on like an international list that goes beyond the other journalists that had been there, and it looked pretty serious. There were lots of countries that I couldn't visit anymore, countries like Vietnam. I hired a lawyer, and they said there was lots of places where I would be extradited to Russia if I went to. And I think it's because the video that I made in Kursk was much more on the nose. It was really calling out Russia. And it was also the follow-up video, right, where I had said, I went here to show that Ukrainians were treating Russian citizens well. They were giving them aid, they were giving them food. And when Russia Today had their first news reports, as soon as the Russians took back that territory, they were saying that everyone was tortured and killed and murdered. And what I put out was a direct contradictory to that. And so I think they went really, really, really harsh on it. Also, I was a little bit extra as well with my tweets. You know, I really sort of poked them. But what happened about 3 months after that, which is about 4 months ago, was they sanctioned 6 other journalists with byline. Serena Zabriskie, Paul Conroy, Peter Jukes, John Sweeney, basically everyone in the whole organization. And so they really went high. Now Byline is now has the most sanctions of any journalist of a publication in Britain. So they really went overboard with it. But Russians don't like being humiliated, right? Kursk was a humiliation. Ukraine took and held that territory for 8 months. My film was about that. It wasn't about the strategy. It wasn't about how they did it. It was the fact that it was successful because it showed that Russia is weaker than they put out. And that's what they don't like. And that's why I think that's why they targeted me more than ever, which is, you know, it's difficult. You know, my travel plans are changed. You know, I went on holiday a few months ago. I have to look over which countries I'm flying over, so they don't down the plane. I've got to make sure there's no layovers in certain places, so I don't get, you know, extradited. And it has an impact because they try and stop people making these kind of reports. But it was worth it because it was in the archives. And years from now, people can look back on that film. They can see the footage I got, and they can see that there were Russian citizens treated well. And it was important to get. It's why journalism is important.
Let's talk about your latest film, The Famers of Kherson. You released this directly to YouTube a little less than 2 weeks ago. I watched it. It was very touching, very moving. I can tell that the way that you designed the film, you know, this is supposed to be for film festivals and maybe like a cinematic experience. It's very pace setting with the music and the establishing shots. So I'm going to link the video down below, and if you're watching this podcast interview, please check out Caolan's most recent documentary, The Famers of Kherson. But can you give the backstory? Who is this farmer that you featured in the film? And his first name, I believe, is Alexander.
Alexander Gordienko. I saw a photo of him holding a shotgun about 2 months ago, and it made him really famous all over Twitter. And he was a symbol of resilience and defiance against Russian terror. And he had that shotgun because farmers in Kherson, they need a plow, they need a harvester, and they need a shotgun. It's like having a standard tool of any farmer. And he stood in the face of everything that Russia is trying to suppress in Kherson. And I really wanted to interview him, so I emailed him and tried to set this up. And about 5 days later, I was on a flight to Ireland to go to a film festival about hunted in Kherson. and I saw that he had been killed by a Russian drone, and I immediately knew that it was intentional and knew that it was because he had become elevated. He'd become more of a symbol, right? And so I started becoming obsessed with this because this is what the Soviets did to Ukraine during the Holodomor. They used food as a weapon through famine, and now they're using drones in exactly the same way. And this is just the beginning. So I had a feeling they would start intensifying this. I'd already seen clips and videos of farmers and farmers' staff running around screaming in fields full of watermelons away from FPV drones, all around Berislav and Kherson. And I started reaching out to his whole family, and I found his daughter, Alina, who's incredible. And she said that it was intentional. She said that the type of drone that hit his car, and she described in detail how it was killed, was using a different frequency, was much more powerful to the rest of the drones that they were using in that area. They knew what car he was driving at that time, and they killed him on purpose because he was a symbol of resilience. And so I spent weeks going back to Kherson and finding farmers in that area, which was so hard to do because it's heavily controlled, right? It's extremely difficult for journalists to get anywhere near Berislav. There's checkpoints everywhere. It's the Russians see all the cars going in and out all the time. But I wanted to show the fear that everyday farmers live with every single day, so that people in the rest of the world can understand what's at stake here. I mean, of the 8.1 billion people on Earth, all of us eat food. All of us survive because of farmers. And those are the people that the Russians are targeting because they're farmers. And it's unprecedentedly evil. And it's something that the United Nations, the European Union should be talking about. But I think this is just the beginning of this. So I started making the film, putting it all together, and I made it not for YouTube, not for sort of like a sort of a clickbait type flash in the pan moment. I wanted this to be a film that people can look back on in 10, 20 years and say, this is what the Russians did back in 2005. This is what the Russians did in 2006 when they tried to starve Ukraine. This was the beginning of it. And it's an archive piece of history. And it's something I'll be submitting to film festivals next year. But it was done to remember his legacy as well. And I premiered it at John Sweeney's Film Festival here in Kyiv a couple of weeks ago. And it was so emotionally intense because his entire extended family were there. And Alexander was a hero in Kherson. Every single person from the city center to the outskirts of the city knew who he was and smiled when I mentioned his name, looked up at the sky with tears in their eyes about how much of a hero he was. And they went back to his farm a couple of weeks ago, just before the film was released, and they collected the last grains from his harvest, and they made this as well as a gift. And this is a bread that was made, and it's wrapped around the Ukraine flag, and they gifted this to me as a gift to say this was his last harvest, and as a thank you for making this film and honoring his legacy. And I'm trying to have it preserved right now in the way that the Egyptians used to preserve bread. So I'm figuring out how to do that. But it felt important, and now it feels more relevant because yesterday the Russians released FPV footage chasing farmers around the Donetsk region for fun, killing them there. They hit a pig farm in Kharkiv a couple of weeks ago as well, and they're going to really start hammering food in this country. And at the exact same time, yesterday, Bellingcat released an investigation looking at stolen grain from Kherson and Zaporizhia that was shipped out of Sevastopol, headed for Yemeni, through the Suez Canal, through the Shadow Fleet. And so at the same time of sort of bombing the Odessa port, murdering farmers, they're also stealing grain and sending it and selling it to the rest of the world to pay for this war. And it's indescribable evil, because when we think about Ukraine, we think about bombs, we think about grenades, we think about guns, we think about the trenches. But this is an attack on food itself. And farmers are, or should be, the most loved people in the world. And I grew up in rural Ireland around farmers. The smell of turf is like my childhood memory. And I love farmers. I remember pulling up turnips when I was a kid with the farmers in the fields. I remember when I was with Byline TV, the news outlet I ran for 5 years. I interviewed farmers who felt remorse and regret for voting for Brexit because they were promised better trade deals and were let down. And I've always felt an affinity and attachment to farmers. And to see them treated like this, and to see this happening in not just the biggest country in Europe, but the breadbasket of Europe. Ukraine feeds Europe. 80% of sunflower oil in Europe is from this country. If you live in Europe, you probably have a small piece of Ukraine in your cupboard. That is under attack. And that's why I made that film. But I think it's just the beginning.
Is there anything the farmers can do to protect themselves aside from shotguns? I know a lot of them have drone detectors, but do FPV drones that have fiber optic cables, do those even show up on those drone detectors?
There's no defense other than shotguns. So FPV cables can't really translate through water. It's why when I was in Estonia and I was talking to the new drone units that were being set up, most of Estonia's border with Russia is a big reservoir. They don't have drone units there ready and set up because as soon as a fiber optic cable goes through water, through a few meters, especially salt water, the signals get interrupted, and there's the Dnipro River. So most of the stuff going across into Kherson is not fiber optic. You can use jammers, but Olisander had a jammer on his roof. He had one of the best rep systems, and they still managed to get past it. There is no defense to it other than trying to shoot them down. He managed to shoot down between 100 and 200 drones over 2 years, which is amazing. But at some point, your luck's going to run out. The only defense is for Russia to be destroyed or for Russia to stop fighting in Ukraine. I mean, these are everyday. Farmers already have to deal with the worst situations, whether you're in America or Britain. Whether you're going to have good weather one year, whether you're going to have a good season, good crops. Waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning so you can do your fields before sunrise. Dealing with a threat like that, drones hovering above your head, it's something on another planet. But there's no defense to it. I mean, right now, Kherson this morning was shelled heavily, and Donivka was shelled heavily, and the city center was hit massively. The civilians at least are protected in the city center by drone nets and lots of local law enforcement shooting these things down. But when you're in a big open field, there's nothing. And I felt so exposed. When I was filming with these farmers, I felt more safe in the city center of Kherson, where at least you could run into a cafe or run into a bunker. But I was in an open field and it felt more exposed than ever, but you're just as close to the river. So it's seriously dangerous. I mean, I spent nights with these guys because curfew in Kherson is 8 p.m., right? So the time it takes to get from the city center to Borislav is 2 hours. So I wanted to film at sundown every night to get those cinematic shots. And as soon as it gets to sundown, then I got to stay with the farmers. And it's extremely scary. You can hear drones going over constantly overnight, and you know that there's no one there to shoot them down. So you feel completely naked and exposed in a whole different way. And this is where the Nova Kahova Dam was blown as well, this exact area, which was the first nightmare for these farmers, because when that dam blew, all the irrigation systems, all the water systems dried out the land. They had to deal with that. They had to deal with the mines. And now this. And it's really the most unbelievable nightmare I think I've ever seen in Ukraine for everyday regular civilians.
So there's Kherson, the oblast, and then there's Kherson, the city. Can you talk about your experience getting in and out of the city of Kherson while it's basically under siege from these Russian drones?
Well, I've been going to Kherson since it was liberated, and back then it was easy to get in. You just drive down the Mykolaiv Highway. It takes an hour, and it's a big open road, and you don't start to feel any danger, or I didn't back then, until you get to the city center, to Freedom Square, where you can see the Russians at the other side of the river, where you can see the South Bank, right? Because that's where the Russians are. And back then, the threat was artillery, and you at least felt a bit of protection or safety being on the north side of the buildings because everything was flying in this way, right, from the south of the river. And then drones became the second nightmare. So you could still get into the city pretty safely, but anywhere within the city center area became much more dangerous. You started to notice things that could hover above you. You started to feel a lot more exposed. But this last trip, I've never seen anything like it. I couldn't physically drive in, which I didn't think was possible because all the cars were on fire and the roads were closed because the Russians have changed their tactics in the last few months. They've done this in Dobrobylia, they've done this in Kramatorsk as well. And that's to hit the supply routes. They hit a UN truck last month coming into one of these roads. And that's to basically shut off and cut off anything coming in and out of the city. So I had to take a train, and there was only one train once a day, there still is, into that city, and the Russians had posted on Telegram a few days before that they were going to start hitting the train station because that was the last lifeline into the city, and they said it was a legitimate target. So I didn't know at sort of 7 p.m. when the train arrived whether the train was going to be hit or not. And it was unbelievable because it was like sneaking into a major city. And I come out of the station and suddenly the entire station is covered in drone nets. You get rushed underground into the train station quickly by all the military, and then they rush you through a sort of network of nets into the city center, and it's unbelievable. It's like being ushered into a city. I've never seen anything like that in Ukraine, and that's because they're trying to basically choke off the whole place. And I've seen these drone nets, in Dobrobylya. I've seen them in the east, but not in an entire city center where people are shopping and walking every day. But it was like feeling trapped as well, right? This is a city that had 300,000 people. Now the population's 55, 60,000. And at least before, I could have maybe jumped in a taxi or called someone and they could have picked me up and sped out. At that point, there's no way out. There's one train in and out every single day, and that's it. And it's a difficult train to even get on. I was in a cabin with 6 other people, and it was 20 hours and extremely hot. It was a really intense experience. And I stayed with Zarina right in the city center, because you can't report on conflict unless you're right in the center of it, and that was important to experience because you have to show how everyday civilians are living. The building was shaking every few minutes. There were cabs dropped something like 15 times the next morning when we woke up. And it was extremely dramatic. I mean, that city is under siege in a way that I've never seen before. And the residents are moving north now. When I first visited, when we last spoke, when we did 100 in Kherson, they were all still living in the center. They were just hiding under trees. And now they've all moved to the upper side, and they've drained the whole thing of life. In an attempt to try and make people give up, to make people not care. Because that's the Russian mentality, right? If you subjugate people and if you brutalize people, they'll give up. They'll say, you know what, Russia can take over. We're sick of this. Zelensky can do whatever. We don't want to defend our land anymore. But it has the opposite effect. All the residents, all the farmers that I spoke to that were in direct line of fire said that they were more determined than ever to grow seeds from their soil, to create new life, and to keep living every day as a fuck you to the Russians. And that was the point. And it's inspiring and it's amazing. And it's why her son will never be taken back by Russia.
You mentioned friend of the channel, Zarina Zabriskie. I saw your behind the scenes video, and that was I think that was my favorite part of that video, where you went to a new restaurant that was opened up. Zarina wanted to make sure to take you to this restaurant to say people are still trying to live their lives. This is a brand new restaurant in the city of Kherson, a city under siege, and let's go get some food. Can you just talk about your meal at this restaurant, and did you have a chance to talk to like the waitress or the owner, and what were they thinking about opening a restaurant when the city has been under siege for years now?
Well, it's nice that you say that because I get reluctant to show things like that because I used to be worried that people would say, "Oh, there's no war going on. There's people living a normal life. There's people having dinner. There's people having lunch. This seems, Ukrainians are okay." But actually, it was unbelievable to see in a place like that where life was being drained every single day, under fire every single day. And I remember I woke up in the morning having about an hour's sleep, and Zarina saying, "By the way, there's a new place that's opened up in town. Do you want to go?" And I said, "What do you mean there's a new place that's opened up in town? All the places we used to go are gone." And she was like, "No, no, no, I'm completely serious. And it's all Hersonian food." I said, "Well, okay, that's good to go because I'm making a film about farmers and what they're growing from the soil." And she said, "No, I'm actually serious." And until we got there, I thought she was, joking. And we came in, and it was just this tiny piece of serenity. And in the background, and you can hear it in our interview, there is still shelling, there's still bombs going off in the distance every 2 or 3 minutes. You can still hear this, right? This place is still under fire. It's still the front line, but it's like a tiny carve out of normalcy. And we asked the waiter, why did they open? What inspired him? And he called up the owner, and the owner wasn't there, but he's messaged me, and he said, because I grew up in Kherson, in occupied territories now, and every single dish in that restaurant is named after a different region of Kherson. Some are called the Pink Lakes, and it's like this beautiful pink salmon dish. Every single dish is named after some of the most beautiful parts of Kherson, and I included this in the report. But if you go and look at any footage of what Kherson looked like before the Russians arrived, it was a paradise. And some Ukrainians even say they prefer it to parts of Crimea because it's the only oblast in Ukraine which has the access to the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. And you've got the most incredible places where people would camp, honeymoon, vacation, go on summer holidays. They have a desert. It's absolutely stunning. And I feel it's weird. I almost feel nostalgic for a place that I've never visited, that I could never go to when I see these images and try these foods. And there's something about the soil in Kherson that can grow the best vegetables. I'm not exoticizing this place at all. I mean, this is like, I had so many comments from Westerners say that they passed by through this city decades ago and they had the exact same experience, that grows the best food, and it's just made with love. And so the owner just said, I opened it for that reason, just so people could see what the Russians took away, and so we could try and still carve out and create what we used to have despite shelling. And it's also, Khersonians are very tough. They're very, very, very tough people. They have a good sense of humor. It's very dry. They're slightly different in their mentality to the rest of Ukrainians. They really see themselves as their own identity. But they're the most amazing people. And they're very proud of their city. And opening that restaurant was an act of defiance against the Russians to say, you're trying to take our life away. You're trying to kill us and destroy us. We're going to open a restaurant that is named after every place you tried to destroy. And we're going to serve food every single day. And that is inspiring. It's amazing.
Is Zarina committed to staying in the city as long as she can? I mean, I can't imagine what daily life is like. Zarina puts out these updates, and she'll be walking down the streets to go to yoga, and then she'll hear a drone go off or a bomb go off, and then try and film her reports just walking down the street. But does Zarina believe that she can just continue staying there, or eventually does she think she might have to leave?
Zarina's adopted the mentality of people in Kherson, which is who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And everyone has that. My fixer had that. It was impossible to plan anything with these farmers because I said, what are they doing tomorrow? What time are they waking up? When can we film the sunrise? And they said, we don't know. It's tomorrow. We'll see what happens tomorrow. And it took me a while to understand it, but it's what Zarina has. And I asked her at the end of the interview when we were in the restaurant, I said, and I asked her as a friend, I've known Zarina for 7 years. We've been making films together since I left the right. And I said, how long are you going to stay here for, even off camera? And she said, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm just going to wake up and see. And I don't know. I mean, I love her. She's amazing. I hope that she's safe. And it's really hard, even seeing the strikes on the city center today. The first thing I did was check in on her, and she's fine. I talked to her about an hour ago. Um, but it's it's a difficult thing, especially having friends and who do war corresponding as well and who do journalism like this, because you can adapt to your surroundings very quickly and you can become like the locals. And in some ways that's amazing, but in other ways it's dangerous. So I hope she's safe, and what she does is so important, and I'm so proud of her for staying there. I couldn't stay there for longer than a few days because you literally can't sleep. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen there. I guess it's what everyone else thinks. Who knows what happens tomorrow? It's just the way your mind starts adapting. It's the way the human brain deals with something like this, deals with war.
I think we did speak about this in the last podcast we did in February, but I'm just struck how Ukraine is an accessible country to Westerners, people who want to go there, such as yourself, and film content and try and get it out. But there are so few people. There are so people like you and Zarina. There's a couple others that I've featured on this channel. I've tried to find. I want to follow these people because I need these firsthand reports in English, speaking, as a Westerner's perspective. I understand there's lots of fantastic Ukrainians covering all of this, and they do try to translate the reports in English to get them out. Fantastic channels, people doing amazing work. But why do you think there are so few people willing to do what you're doing? Go to Ukraine and just give these firsthand accounts. Do you think it's purely financial, or do you think it's the danger aspect, or people are just not interested in this conflict?
I think it's because it's dangerous and it's scary and it is really expensive. And to properly report on Ukraine, you kind of have to be here full time to really understand what this country is, to understand the differences between Kyiv and Lviv and Odessa and Kharkiv and Kherson and Zaporizhia, to really understand the culture and to understand what Russia is doing on a day-to-day basis. You kind of have to fully live here and fully embrace everything that's happening. And I think that's a huge commitment. If you've got family, if you're a war reporter that is sent around the world by your editor to do Gaza one day and Singapore the next day, or Hong Kong or the riots, whatever it is, it's impossible. And so that's why people always come and go. It's why it's really lonely here. You know, any of the friends I make that are journalists are usually only here for a week, and then you see them once next year. But it's hard and it's expensive, and it's also creating content in an environment where not a lot of people seem to care. You know, you have an amazing committed audience, and I have an amazing committed audience as well. But the whole of the world feels like it moves on sometimes. Elon Musk has suppressed the algorithms on X and elevated Russian propaganda far more than Ukrainian voices. And it's really hard to get any sort of information out there unless you push as hard as possible. I mean, I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the amount of work it takes to put in to get these videos out so they're marketable, so they're consumable, so they make sense, so they're good production value, so they stand out is massive. And I burnt out 1,000 times since I last went on your channel doing it. And it's hard. It's hard to do. But I think there's enough good people doing it, and there's enough amazing people like you elevating all of the voices here, and that it doesn't feel without hope. But it's difficult. You know, you in the old world, you would need a film crew to be able to produce content like this. You would you know, in traditional media, you would need a camera person, an editor, a fixer, a translator, a driver. You'd need a whole crew, and it would cost tens of thousands a week to exist somewhere like this. And it still exists in a lot of ways. I've somehow, and people like Serena have somehow found a way to do it all ourselves using phones, using old cameras, using technology, using AI translations, using the fact that we can hike a bus to get to places. That's the way I always go to Kherson, is public transport. That's not the usual way that media works, but it's difficult. It's excruciating, and I think that's why there's a big barrier to people doing it.
I think
But
the
it's worth it.
legacy news. I think the legacy news reports, CNN or Reuters or BBC, like that'll always still exist. But those people have to cover the entire world. And
Yeah.
obviously, they're not going to be in Ukraine every week covering every event. So, citizen journalists, I don't even like that term because that's not what you are. You are a professional, but you're a professional in this new media, this new, I think, expectations that audience have. I think ordinary people using social media and the internet every day, they like seeing ordinary people that they can relate to making these news reports. Sometimes when you have the high profile people like Anderson Cooper or whatever, you know that he is very well off, very successful, very well known. But when a smaller reporter, has the passion, has the drive, looks authentic, seems genuine, that actually has a bigger impact than these large media reports. So I do want to quick ask you because I know a well-known American left-leaning influencer, Luke Beasley, came to Ukraine and spent some time with you. And I do see this new generation forming in response to basically what the right has been doing for 10 years. We've talked about people like Benny Johnson, Dave Rubin, Tim Pool, Lauren Chen, and there is no equivalent of this young crop of I don't want to call them influencers, but commentators or activists. But yeah, Luke Beasley, I want to give him a shout out and thank him for taking the time to go to Ukraine and filming some reports. So I just want to get your thoughts, your reactions. What was it like for you working with him? And then what was his reaction to coming to the country and seeing firsthand what he saw?
Well, Luke invited me on his show because I had a viral video on Instagram after a huge missile strike on Kyiv. And after the Riverside, he said, and he's happy for me to say this, like do you think I could ever go to Ukraine? Do you think it's possible? And I texted him and said, yeah, legit. Like, I can help with your logistics. I can help with your planning. And over the next few days, he was like, I can't get this idea out of my head. I really want to go. So I booked his train. I helped with his flights. I like basically booked his hotel, arranged the entire trip for him. Um, and because I love bringing people here, right? Like, I'm not here for any other reason other than to show people what's happening, whether that's through my videos, through talking to you, or through physically bringing people here, right? I'm getting married in a month today here, and I'm bringing my family here and friends here. I just want as many people to come to Ukraine as possible. But he was, he was nervous. This is a young guy, he's 23, who has never been in a situation like this before. And I remember how I was when I first came to Ukraine, especially going to a place like the Donbass, completely petrified. But I he has a massive audience, 1.2 million YouTube subscribers. That's just one platform. And I felt like it would be a hugely beneficial thing, not just for his audience to see what's really happening here, but for him to then go on in future and know the reality when he talks about Ukraine and having spoken to soldiers. If he gets invited on Piers Morgan and places like that, he can say, I was there, and he can shout out whatever idiot Russian propagandist is there denying what's happening. Um, it was interesting. Once he got here, he's extremely mature for his age, being able to deal with the city straight away. His first air raid sirens. What was interesting is he was still trying to do the formality of his show as soon as he arrived here, and doing like a studio setup and doing like a professional setup, and then kind of realized over the few days, actually, you know what? Let's just run and gun it. Let's just go and let's just film it with our phones. Let's just send it to our editors, and it was quite a fun process. But I took him to Kramatorsk, right? And two journalists were killed there yesterday, and we drove to Druzhkivka, which is now full of Russians. I mean, this city is basically under siege. We drove to Dobrobelia. These places are obviously extremely hot and extremely dangerous. But at the time, we were staying with someone that I trusted, April, who is amazing. She's a combat medic from Canada. And we lived in a soldier's outhouse, right, for a couple of days with not much electricity, no hot water. That was just an abandoned house. And it was kind of I think it was pretty life-changing for him. I remember him sitting there with me, listening to the sound of bombs and drones flying over, and him saying that he probably will never be the same again after this. And he released a YouTube video at the time which got about 1 million views, saying that I'll never be the same after this. And it does change you, and I could see that in him completely. Sometimes it can change you for the worse and make you despair and see the worst in humanity and think that the world is going to be over and evil is going to take over forever. But I think what Luke saw was the best. He saw two teenagers still selling pizza next to Ria in Kramatorsk, the restaurant that was destroyed a few years ago, that had just opened up, that said, we're here because we love our country and we're a new generation of Ukrainians that want to see our country free. He saw soldiers genuinely say that they're doing this because they want to defend their country, their land, and their people, and they hate what Russia's doing. And I think that he might have thought that I was taking him on some sort of North Korean guide of Ukraine. I think a lot of Americans think that that's what happens when you come here. It's like, this is Bucha, this is what's happened, this is a blown up building, this is this. But what he realized is Ukraine is completely open. Like, we drove anywhere. He didn't need media accreditation. We just went to these places, went straight through checkpoints. We filmed whatever we liked. And all we had to do was check with the local commanders if certain faces were blurred. And he couldn't believe how open it all was. And we woke up every morning and we were like, shall we go to this place? Well, no, this place has been hit. Well, let's go to this place instead. There's someone in this town that can speak to us here. And I think he realized, like, everything that was good about Ukraine was true. And it was important to do. And there's other people like Luke who are interested in coming as well, and I'm going to facilitate those trips. But yeah, it was interesting. As a 23-year-old kid, though, he is extremely brave to have just gone through all of that without any major panics, any major hiccups. And as soon as we got back to Kyiv, what was wild was, I think what he realized is nowhere's safe in this country. And so many people say, oh, in Ukraine, why don't all these refugees go home, right? There's videos of cafes and restaurants in Kyiv. Everyone's happy, everyone's safe. Why don't they just return to the cities like Lviv? We were driving from Kramatorsk, and as we got towards Kyiv, the sun started to rise over the horizon. And I remember Luke just going, he's going to check into his nice hotel. They'll have the last few days. We're going to have a fancy dinner. I booked him into like a nice, we're going to have a beautiful cocktail bar. We're going to have a nice time. And we had this moment of just relief. and then 3 cruise missiles as we were driving across the Dnipro River. We literally watched crash into the city center, and we filmed this, and he included this in his report. And we drove to the aftermath, and we were there before the first responders, right? We were there before the police, and he was literally standing in the city center, which is a 5-minute walk from where I am, with glass falling down, people being pulled out of buildings. And at that moment, he was like, "Oh, there's no moment of relief. There's not a place where you can finally just take a breath." And he actually saw more terrorism and drama in Kyiv than he did 10 kilometers from the Russians in Dobrobylia. And that is actually what Ukraine is. So it was a wild ride. And I remember telling him before he left, I think it'll take, a couple of weeks to like adjust back to normal life back in lovely, I can't remember what state he lives in, I won't say anyway, but wherever you live. And then everything will feel normal again. And yeah, it was pretty wild, but really important.
I do think when the history of this war is written and they're going to try to explain why did Russia lose, and I do think one of Ukraine's greatest strengths is how asymmetrical they are with sharing information. Obviously, military operations, you still need OPSEC, you still need classified, but the Russians don't give anyone access to frontline forces or the occupied territories or the border regions. The Western journalists or any journalist that isn't directly controlled by the Kremlin, they can't go there and speak to people to get the true story. They can't talk to frontline soldiers. But it's incredible that the Ukrainian military gives you and people like Luke or anyone who wants to cover a story access and doesn't try to control it or restrict it or edit it. Frontline Russian forces, they can't have smartphones, they can't be using the internet. The Russians don't want them taking any pictures or videos of all of the terrible things that they're doing. But on the Ukrainian side, I assume most Ukrainian forces, they're allowed to have their phones. When they have an internet signal, they're allowed to use the internet. Can you just talk about maybe the frontline forces you've recently spoken with? What are they thinking and how are they feeling right now about the current state of the war?
It's true. Well, it's because Ukraine has nothing to hide, right? So they don't have to put out propaganda. They just have to let people in and just show people what's going on. The last soldiers I spoke to, I guess, would have been in Kherson, but I keep in touch with a lot who are on the front line, who are involved in what's happening in Pokrovsk. And the mentality hasn't really changed since Trump was elected, which was a little bit of hope at the time that some soldiers had, thinking, okay, well, there's a US president and they respect the US, not necessarily Trump, but the US, that maybe he could end the war in a couple of days, like he promised. As soon as he got elected and started putting out pro Kremlin statements and started putting out garbage about Putin and started allowing him to come to places like Alaska, um, I think they kind of just totally shut off, based on my experience, um, with all international policy. They didn't care about. I asked soldiers questions in the last month what they think about the United Nations meetings, new sanctions, things like what's happening with the proposal with Budapest, and there's no reaction, there's no response, because to them it's meaningless. Whatever happens outside of Ukraine is now meaningless. For them, it's whatever ammo we get given, we'll use it. Great. Give us as much as possible. We know how to use it, and we're just going to keep fighting. But they've stopped following what's happening on the outside. And I don't blame them in a lot of ways, because it's like a yo-yo, right? Europe promises aid and then they pull back. Trump promises that Ukraine will get all their territory back, and then he says that Ukraine should secede all its territory. So they've just stopped listening. But they're still as motivated as ever, right? As Konstantinivka gets surrounded and bombarded, and probably will fall in the next few months, they're still literally as determined as I've ever met them. And if that changes, I'll report that as well, right? I mean, you can report whatever you want in this country. But people are still motivated and they just keep going.
Can you speak to what other projects you're currently working on? I know you told me you recently went to Greece, so if you want to speak a little bit about that, or any other projects, because I saw your channel member video in which you were talking about what you have thought out over the next couple weeks or couple months. What upcoming projects or videos that you're working on are you excited to share with people?
Well, yeah. So I just did a huge investigation into the Shadow Fleet, which is Russia's secretive operation to get oil out of Russia and sell it, bypassing EU sanctions, stolen grain from Zaporizhia and Kherson to places like Yemen, also used their shadow fleet for espionage and spying. They shut down an airport in Denmark recently with a drone that looks like it was launched from a Russian ship. They're dragging anchors along the sea floor in the Baltics with some of these ships to try and sever internet and electricity cables between Germany and the northern states. So this is Russia's war on the ocean is massive. And 56% of Russia's oil fleet are carrying G7 flags, right? And they're doing ship to ship transfers, which is where you get two ships, one that leaves an occupied area of the Black Sea towards the Suez Canal, will stop by another ship and transfer all of its oil using a hose into another one that carries another flag. And then that ship carries on with a new origin, a new name, a new symbol, and a new identity. And this has all been done to fund Russia's war. So I went to Lesbos, which is an island in the Aegean Sea. And this is one of the main traffic routes of ships leaving the Bosphorus Strait through Turkey from the Black Sea into Egypt. And I went out on boats every single day with fishermen who were very reluctant to be on camera, by the way. Every single fisherman that I spoke to on the island of Lesbos literally said to me, if I included their interviews or showed any of the shape of their ships or the symbols of their ships would be burned down by the Russians, because there are Russians all over these islands who are making money from this, millions of dollars from this. Local news are nervous to report on this. It was completely insane. So with their agreement, I agreed to go out and only show the front of the ship. And I managed to actually film ship-to-ship transfers taking place. This is going to come out on Sunday in my next documentary. And it's to show how open and obvious this is. This was 10 kilometers from the beaches of Greece. If you're in Europe and you go holidaying in the Greek islands, you could be watching Russia's oil transfers that are paying for a war in Europe right in front of you while you're sunbathing on the horizon. This is how in your face it is. And Europe could be doing a lot more to stop it. They could be raiding these ships. They could be clamping down on ship-to-ship transfers. They should be sanctioning the captains themselves. Bellingcat just did an investigation yesterday onto new ships that have just left carrying stolen grain. And they get away with it because there's corruption, there's a lot of money involved. A lot of these ships are serviced in Malta as well, with people that are extremely corrupt. So this is a big documentary that I'm working on now, because I'm not just Russia's war is not just on the people of Ukraine and in the trenches of this country. Its tentacles are everywhere. It's in Georgia with its election interference. It was with Syria. It's with oil. It's with spying and espionage all across Europe. And they are paying for this war using their shadow fleet. And there's not a lot of coverage about it. There's two films, one by DW, one by Bloomberg about this, and then that's it. Because local news in Athens and Lesbos don't want to cover it, because a couple of journalists told me it's too hot, it's too difficult. If you live on the island and you live in these places, you'll be harassed. So I don't mind being harassed by the Russians. I went into Kursk, so I thought, okay, I can go to Lesbos and cover this. So there's that, and then the next film is the fall of 1 year after the fall of Assad. Right, I went to Damascus last year after Assad fell, and the hard left and the far right said there's no way that Syria could be governed without a tyrannical government supported by Putin. Well, it's been a year, and the country's still functioning. And things are still going pretty well. So I'm going to use a lot of the footage I got back then that I haven't released yet about how Russians tried to follow us and interrogate us and release all that again. But other than that, who knows what happens next? I mean, there's a million things that the Russians are doing across this planet, in Africa, in the Central African Republic, in Mali. Maybe I'll go there. There's a million things, but I want to dedicate the next few years to exposing as much as possible what Russia is doing, not just to Ukraine, but across the planet.
Something changed on August 1st, and the Ukrainian government decided we're going to go hard against Russia's oil refineries. There had been previous strikes going back last year and then earlier this year. I do think Trump told Zelensky, stop striking refineries while we're engaging in peace talks. Peace talks have gone nowhere because the Russians are not interested in stopping the war. So since August 1st, I mean, I've already lost track. 16, 18, 20 different refineries have been struck, some of them like Ryazan numerous times. Ukraine is obviously trying to cripple Russia's ability to refine oil, but also export refined oil products for profits, which is what Russia was doing to subsidize their own uh, their own domestic markets. So, what are Ukrainians thinking and seeing about this new strategy? Are they hopeful, or are they just kind of enjoying seeing Russian gas lines and ordinary Russians finally being severely hampered or inconvenienced by a war that their government started? So, yeah, I'm just curious what people in Ukraine are thinking about this new trajectory of Russia running out of fuel.
The friends that I have love watching the videos on repeat on their feeds whenever I'm with them. That's a sense of entertainment and enjoyment, which is great. People in government that I know, people who are officially involved in this country, have a new confidence that I haven't quite seen before that this is going to be a successful strategy. The development of the missiles here, the Flamingo missiles, the way that they're using them, the way that they think in the long term this will cripple the Russian economy has given higher ups like a serious confidence and a smirk and like a smile. And it's all off the record meetings that I've had with a lot of these people. That's why I've not reported it. But people are pretty confident in positions of power here. And I kind of believe them. I mean, it's effective. It takes a long time to repair an oil refinery when you have a labor famine, when you don't have a big workforce, when you don't have a lot of equipment or tools. And they're being hit constantly. And I always said, and this is what Ukrainians know, Russia's biggest strength used to be the size of its country, and now that's its biggest weakness. There's no defense to this. It's like what you talked about with the farmers earlier. Is there a defense to these drones? There isn't for the farmers, but for Russia, there's no defense to this, which is long range strikes. Nothing. And I think it scared them to death when things like storm shadows and Western weapons were used a few days ago as well, because there's definitely no defense to that. And they're plunging this country into a cold winter again. I mean, I'm looking outside my window now. There is not much power in this city. There were power cuts all day today, and this is kind of normal for Ukraine. I'm still showering in cold water, but this is the first time that Russia's experiencing that in a long time, and that's new. Ukraine's been going through this for 4 years, but Russia hasn't. So people can feel that.
We're coming up on an hour, Caolan. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or potentially ask me?
I think you've asked everything. I mean, what should I ask you? Would you like to come to Ukraine? And I'll show you around.
For me, the last 3.5 years, I'm always like, I'm going to wait for a good time. And I think I've come to the conclusion there is no good time. For me to get from the west coast of America to Poland to train in, yeah, I want to. Obviously, I'm committed to this cause. I've dedicated the last 4 years of my life to it. So, yes, it's going to happen. But at the same time, I understand the serious situation happening in the United States. 30 to 40% of my fellow Americans are completely delusional, and they are embracing this new fascist police state. Every day, Donald Trump just does insane thing after insane thing that there is no precedent for. The levels of corruption and abuse of power, we no longer have separation of powers, checks and balances. Uh, Steve Bannon just gave an interview yesterday saying Trump will be the nominee in 2028 and will remain president. He's not going anywhere. He is going, MAGA is declaring he's a king and he will stay in office until he's dead. And then probably one of his sons will take over. It's now a hereditary dictatorship like North Korea.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've lost 30. I mean, I see these people. So I have members of my extended family who are these people, and they are in a cult. They have completely lost their minds. They've abandoned everything that made America what is America today. If you think America is the greatest, most powerful, most prosperous, wealthy country in the world, we did that with immigrants. We did that with having diverse viewpoints and upholding the rule of law and showing decency and respect to anybody. A meritocracy is the best are deserving, but that's not what MAGA is. MAGA is very racist. These young Republican text message chains, this swastika American flag being found in a Republican congressman's office, the level of depravity and debauchery that goes on in the MAGA circles, like It's shocking, and I just think we're in a extremely tumultuous period, and somehow I've lodged myself in the center of it. I do talk about and focus on Ukraine every day, and this is one of the most frequent questions I get. Jake, what are you going to talk about if the war ends? Well, I'm going to talk about America. I'm going to talk about US politics. I think I need to be part of this. I need to help my country. So I'm already thinking strategically, like long term. I do think I have an audience and a platform that is going to be crucial to undoing what the right in America has achieved through social media the last, especially 8, 9, 10 years, with Trump being the figurehead of this movement. So we're not going back to whatever America was under Joe Biden. Joe Biden was the status quo. The guy had been in government for like 54 years. He was a senator and met Ronald Reagan. Like he came into office when Jimmy Carter was president. So I think America had a really good run under that old system, and we're not going back. And we're going to have to build what's new and hopefully what's something that's better. Um,
Why didn't
we're,
it
we're
happen with Trump in his first run? That's what I never understood. Is why is he doing this now? It's only been 9 months and he's destroyed everything. Why didn't he do this in the first 4 years? Why do you think this is now?
he never anticipated becoming president. Like Trump in 2016 was working on a Trump Tower in Moscow while running for president. He was going to launch his own TV show. Trump wanted the publicity and attention, the free media, and he was supposed to lose and then start Trump TV. He and his kids were already working on a news network. He wanted to lose, say that it was the deep state that held him back, go into broadcasting and media, and then make a fortune. So when he got elected, and this is one of the details that I think is hilarious, because all the polls in 2016 said Trump was going to lose. The Access Hollywood tape, of him saying "grab him by the pussy" was 3 weeks before the election. That was the October surprise that was supposed to sink him if these were normal times. And Hillary Clinton had rented like all these barges and had like this glass venue in New York City, and there were going to be fireworks to celebrate. Like Hillary Clinton was ready for this massive celebration of electing the first female as the president of the United States. And obviously she lost, so they didn't have a fireworks show. But Donald Trump didn't have any celebrations prepared. He just was in the lobby of Trump Tower in New York City or something for the election results. There were no celebrations planned because he was not planning on winning. He didn't even have a victory speech written.
Hmm.
That's how shocking him winning was. So as soon as he won, he didn't have a team. He didn't have anyone ready to go. He just started grabbing people. Reince Priebus became RNC chair, or he was RNC chair. He became his chief of staff. He didn't know who to pick. He didn't know what to do. He didn't have an agenda of any kind. So Trump got into office and didn't do anything particularly well, but America was still limping along with our institutions holding. Trump then lost the 2020 election and then decided to come back. And it's all about, I'm a king. I can do whatever I want. I'm bulletproof. I'm untouchable. The Supreme Court has ruled I'm above the law. And everyone in America that knows what's going on, they're just waiting for him to die. He's 80 years old. He's obese. He is extremely unhealthy. He has the most stressful job in the world. And people like Mike Johnson, people like JD Vance, Marco Rubio, they're just waiting for this guy to stroke out, have a heart attack, and then go away. And then they're going to try and take control of the mob, whatever MAGA morphs into, and then shape it in whatever fashion they want. But all of these people have accepted that Donald Trump is above the law, and he has a cult status in which people will unquestionably follow and believe anything he says and does. Obviously, Americans pay tariffs. This is the most obvious thing in the world. A tariff is an import tax that American citizens pay. But Donald Trump says China pays the tariff. India pays the tariff. China and India are giving us money when we buy their products, which is complete nonsense. But his cult will not question it. The government right now has been shut down for 3 or 4 weeks, And this is over subsidies for the American Affordable Care Act. This is Obamacare. And Mike Johnson and Trump are just saying the Democrats shut down the government because they want to give health care to illegal aliens and trans terrorists, Hamas, blah, blah, blah. Like they just word mumbo jumbo lies, and their supporters, Trump supporters, they just repeat it. Like I get these comments on my channel. Jake, how can you be supporting the hard left? They shut down the government because they want to give health care to illegal immigrants when that is not true. So
Yeah.
I don't know how to interact with and engage with people who just repeat obvious lies. They just live in a different reality. They live in a reality of their choosing, which is not something you were capable of doing 30 years ago. If you wanted to consume media through CBS, ABC, NBC, there were editors, there were producers, there were gatekeepers. But now people are completely lost. On social media, there are no rules, there is no censorship. People just live in alternate realities of their own choosing, and they control the government now. Trump and RFK Jr. just declared Tylenol causes autism when there's no scientific evidence for it. I mean, this is terrifying, but this situation that we're in is a result of new technology,
Yeah.
social media, our phones, and we have to fucking find a way to get ourselves out in the current technological rules. So new social media stuff like what you, me, and Luke Beasley are doing, we have to reiterate, test, keep trying, come up with new stuff, keep producing to counter what the right has achieved on social media the last 10 years.
Yeah.
I don't know how this is going to play out, but somehow I found a way to be a part of it.
It's going to be a wild ride and it's going to be messy, but I still have this underlying belief that the truth and something good always prevails somehow, but it's going to be pretty difficult for then.
The good news, I mean, Trump's already getting approval ratings in the 30s now, the high 30s. So it is falling apart. It's collapsing because he has all the responsibility. You can make a lot of money being a conspiracy theorist when you're not in power, but when your side controls the Justice Department, the FBI, the military, the CIA, all of a sudden you can't be a conspiracy theorist anymore. People like, Tim Pool and Dave Rubin, they love being in the minority. They love being out of power, and then they can shadow cast on all these figures and promote conspiracies. But if something bad happens, they're in charge. They're responsible, and they're taking all the heat now. They're getting all the criticism. They're getting all the hate comments, and they don't like being in that position. But yeah, they just need to be hammered day after day for 4 years until I don't know how we're going to get our government back from these people, because they will use violence. They will use the military. They will use the IRS. They just announced that they're going to create a special division in the IRS to just go after liberals and try and shut down anybody that opposes MAGA. So no, we got serious problems, but we're gonna have to work through. I'm never gonna shut up. I'm never gonna give up. Like if I have to flee the country, I'll flee the country. But in no way am I just going to become docile and complacent in a new fascist state, which is what the average Russian has done in their country.
Do you feel it when you travel? Because you've just been on a trip. Like, do you see it and feel it in airports and people, like a fundamental difference in the last 9 months with that shift?
I think the average person has become more brazenly racist. I mean, you see these videos going viral all the time. What Trump and MAGA has done in ending wokeness is if you're a white woman and you see a brown or a black person having fun at a baseball game, this happened at Brewers Stadium. This is Milwaukee. You can just, if you don't like what they're joking about or what they're saying, you can just start calling them racist names and say you're going to call ICE on them. This woman got fired from her job and she got banned from Brewers Stadium forever. So there still is some consequences for these people, but people are just so horrible to each other. And this is what Fox News and right wing media does. It just teaches you to fear and hate anyone that is slightly different than you,
Yeah.
when there is plenty in this world for everyone. There is no reason to racially profile or, I don't know, just be so cruel for no reason. And I don't understand this scarcity mentality that they all consume and embrace, that America doesn't have enough to welcome and take care of and Americanize. You know, my grandparents came here as immigrants from the Netherlands. They didn't speak English, and they went to a small town in Wisconsin. They had the right skin color, but in that context, like they're no different than somebody coming here from Central America. When I speak to Europeans and we talk about America's immigration problems. A lot of people in Europe would be like, "We'd love to have Latinos coming to our country because they're Christian and at least they speak like a Romance language. You know, Spanish is one of the languages of the EU. I think a third of the population of the southwest of America is Latino. Like, how do you just racially profile all of them? How can you just be so cruel and inhumane to these people and not treat them with respect and dignity when they're not committing violent crimes, they're working jobs, they're paying taxes, they're contributing to the GDP of the economy? You know, a rising tide raises all boats, or whatever that expression is. I don't
Mhm.
understand it, Kalen. I never will.
Well, it's easy to make people feel scared and feel like they're under attack. Like I used to have views like that when I was, 19, when I was 20, when I was very young. And these were put out by rebel big news outlets. And there's a lot of money to be made in making people scared and making people terrified. It's what Russia does, it's what MAGA does. And it's profitable and it puts you in power. It's why I dedicated the last 8 years of my life to combating it, because I know how it works, how toxic it is, and how easy it is to feel like that, to feel like there's that you're under attack. And it's easy to convince people. But the people doing it know exactly what they're doing, and that's the most insidious thing, you know.
Well, it's the culture wars versus the class wars. I don't like the term class war because it invokes, socialist communist ideology. So if I end up like dedicating my YouTube channel to this, I'm going to call it the money war. In that, when you give tax cuts to the rich and then you raise tariffs, you're shifting tax burden from the top 1% to ordinary consumers. And sales tax is a regressive tax, income tax is a progressive tax. The average American doesn't know or understand any of this. But the reason why the right pumps the culture wars so much is because they don't want people thinking about or talking about rising grocery prices. Why is rent unsustainably cost prohibitive? Healthcare premiums. Like living in America right now is brutal. If you're a young person trying to just live on your own and start a family, like you're screwed. Europe is a little bit different than the United States, but when I speak to the average Gen Z or people in their 20s, they're all nihilists because they're economically screwed. They can't afford car insurance, like they can't afford anything, and unless your parents are helping you, paying the way a little bit, you just can't even start your life. You can't even get going.
Yeah,
So the right knows this, and these billionaires don't have any economic message. They have nothing to offer their voters. So the only thing they can do is talk about trans people and immigrants and affirmative action or whatever. Like they have to just blast this every day to stop people from having conversations about why can't I afford rent? Why is healthcare free in 200 countries out of the world and there's only two where universal healthcare is not the norm? Uh, and I do think that the way we get out of this in 2028 is economic populism. And I know that the Democratic establishments, the liberal elite or whatever, they don't want to become economic populists. They don't want to embrace people like Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio Cortez or this Mamdani guy who's going to become mayor of New York City. But that's the only way out. The only way to defeat MAGA and all of their hatred and racist bullshit is economic populism, to provide a real path forward that will involve raising taxes on the rich to undo the successive rounds of tax cuts, because it's all a structure problem. And That's the way out. I'm not seeing it yet from the Democratic establishment. They're resisting it, but I think they're not going to have a choice. I think so many people like Mamdani are just going to primary incumbents, and the Democratic Party in 2028 will be unrecognizable. It won't be anything like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, what we've been dealing with the last 20 or 30 years. Those people are losers. They have failed. They need to retire. They need to go away and allow the next generation to fix this country. So that's what's coming, and I'm part of it. I'm hoping to interview as many of these people as possible and promote them when I see them. But yeah, I think the primary voters are figuring it out, and they know the direction we need to go in to defeat Trump finally.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting. Yeah, it's true. I saw the seed banning thing as well. It's absolutely wild.
All right, Caolan, I held on to you for a little extra time to let myself vent about U.S. politics and
It was good.
how dangerous the world is getting. But I really appreciate your time. I'm going to give you the final word. What do you want to say to the people who are still watching?
Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. I don't know what else to say.
Famers of Kherson, I'm going to put the link down below. Give it a watch. Give Caolan a subscribe and a like if you haven't done so already. He's doing fantastic work.
Thank you, Jake.